we'd start global variables versus global fields, buttons versus button bars, filtered relationships versus execute SQL, and then tabs versus sliders. So like I said, we can start from those, or if there's another pair that you would rather talk about more, we can just jump into that. So that was from Tony. So yeah, we'll definitely, that's one thing I don't do very often, so we can definitely throw that in there. So I guess we can just start with global variables versus global fields. And this is one I would have to say it depends for me as to, yeah, I can kind of see both sides of the issue. So I don't know if there's anybody that feels strongly one way or another want to.
Global fields if you have to have a relationship.
Definitely.
Global variables if you want to be able to ever change the data.
True. I know one of the ones that they brought up in the duel was that depending on how you script it, the global variables you can actually declare as you need them. You can actually have a script that makes them for you, you know, which obviously is something that's not going to happen if you're using global fields.
Oh, yeah.
It's something that I've never done, but they said that, you know, if you could, you know, script it and declare as many as you want. I know I personally find myself using global variables a little bit more than I used to. Now that you can actually use a variable as a destination for like a custom dialogue and some of those other things. But yeah, there's still places where I feel that, you know, you have to use the global field. So they're not going away.
It's like the tool of last resort.
Yeah.
The default is a global variable, but if something like you need a relationship, you know, something will trump it. It's like, oh, I better go to that side.
Yeah.
And then to piggyback on that, declaring the variables, the debate comes up about declaring them all in one let statement or in multiple set variable statements.
Yeah, that's an important topic for me. I think the one more thing on the, and this is, you know, leveraging the previous conversation, global fields, better security, you know, because they can be hidden, you know, they can be behind a prohibit modification. And apparently the you know, things that show up in the data viewer can be hacked on some edge cases. So better security for global fields.
Oh, good point.
True.
Since at the 2000 developer conference in Palm Desert, California, I'm the one who on the stage publicly requested FileMaker to institute variables, both local and global. I have used them extensively. I do, and really, I believe we might have been at that conference as well. But I also use global fields, and there are a lot of misconceptions about global fields and what you can and can't do with them. But they're both very, both the variable and the field are useful. I tend to use the set variable rather than the let statement, but that's just probably because that's the way I started doing it, and I have seen no reason to change.
Yeah, I like the set variable. The one more thing on global fields that did not get mentioned in the episodes 1 and 2 of the Grand Battle is global fields can contain styled text, which can be useful in a like a layout dialogue, old school layout dialogue, and I reckon a bunch of other places where, as far as I know, you cannot put styled formatted text into a variable. So if you want to pass styled text around.
Okay. Very good. Well, anybody have anything on this? And we'll just go ahead and slide right into we'll pick up on the set variable versus declaring via a let statement, since it's kind of a natural transition there. I know personally, I find myself using the set variable step just because I find it easier to debug later on. I don't have to drill down into a bunch of stuff to see what is this variable being set to, where if it's all in one giant let statement, then you're kind of left scratching your head and you have to either print the whole thing out or drill into it. But that's, and plus that's how I learned too. So that's just how I keep using it. So I don't know.
Yeah, now that we've got shortcuts, so you can do SV for set variable, and use a couple of keystrokes to actually enter the data. It's a little easier than old school. So I kind of been doing this set variable for each step for same reasons, to be able to debug immediately if it's not excessively wide.
I want to say, I think, it's kind of like one of Todd's unwritten rules is that you don't declare $ or double $ variables in a let statement. But the only place that I do it on occasion is if I'm working with a custom dialog and I want to have dynamic button names. I'll use like a $ variable there, and then I can use the same name for the name of the button. So if I'm giving the user a choice, pick this one or that one, it actually says this or that when they go to choose it. And that way I only have to do the calculation once. So I will do it there, but yeah, usually set variable. So.
Cool.
Oops. Yeah, I'll plus one on the set variable for the readability, as Todd mentioned. And I'm dropping a link. We feel strongly about it. Did an infographic about how we pass stuff around. It's a little bit, we did it a while ago, so it uses the 6 fried rice. JSON would be the same. It's essentially, declare the things, package them up, unwrap them one by one by one by one, so they're super duper visible in the what it's called data viewer debugger, all over the place, probably even the DDR, and then make use of them. So it's very, very visible, because coding is hard.
Okay.
The only, I will say, since no one really stood up for the let, I don't really think but I've been seeing it out in the wild, in custom functions. We bump into systems that have it, and I'm kind of scratch my head, and I think, well, maybe it's faster, because I can't, from code readability to me is number one. So why would anyone use something that's so difficult to read? Magical instantiation, and I thought maybe it's faster. But I haven't seen anyone kind of say this is faster, that's why we use it. So anyway, I still vote with the set variable. I will say one more thing. Apparently someone as of 16 is, instead of set variable, I forget who, but it was like, I'm now using insert text or something versus set variable 16 and up. But that's a habit to break. But if you're locked in at 16, it's maybe better insert something or other into a variable when they showed up there, 16.
I think that was for set field. When you're setting the same field, when you're concatenating many, many things, insert calculated text or something like that was faster. It was seemed pretty specific use. I don't think it was for a variable.
I'll defend the let statement when I'm setting something up where it's a generic mapping thing, and several people can use it, but my database may be different fields, and instead of trying to mess with other ways of doing it, I'll have a let statement with all the variables, and then they just insert whatever their field name is, and so then it set them all up at once at the beginning, so those variables are used later on for whatever I need to do in scripting, and it's, it only needs to be done once, so it doesn't necessarily have to go back to it without, go ahead and print it if you need to, but it's just generically setting up.
I may be wrong here, but doesn't let variables tend to be within calculations? I may be wrong, but I think I see them a lot in calculations.
Yeah, let variables are one of the 3 kinds in their scope to the calculation or scope to the let statement. What people do for good reasons and perhaps for bad reasons as well, is they use a let function to instantiate single $ and double $ variables that have scope outside of the let statement. And there's custom functions that you can find out there, although I don't really want to popularize them, not a believer. But let variables, which are often tilde, we use tilde, are a third kind.
Yeah, does that help, Tim? Because I use the let function all the time to declare the local variables to the function like you're talking about. I just don't use them for, reading those $ or double $ variables.
I just, when I look at different things I've found on the web and so on that related to FileMaker, some things I just tended to see them a lot within calculations.
Yeah, those are fine. Let variables, they are the variables that exist within that. They are the ones that don't have a $ or two $ in front of them. Those are 100% legitimate. I mean, those are non-controversial, let's say. They're nice. They're scoped, so you use them in a let, and they don't, escape and muddy up your script. But it sounds like set variable 1.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything more on that before we move on? Let's say Chris threw out an interesting one here: live versus offline development.
Live for the adrenaline. Where's the fun in staging and all that kind of stuff?
You're not a real coder unless you're playing with live ammunition.
Well, and you have to say live users online versus live production after hours versus offline. There's like some other gradients
Shades
there.
of gray, yes. Could be live on your desktop with you as the only user.
Right.
Hey, Chris, this would make a great presentation topic.
You'd think, wouldn't it?
Good setup, Tony.
Thank you. Are you, is .fm, is that what it's called, .fm? Are they
.fmp.
recording or no?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, awesome. Okay, cool. And then, but that's, yeah, okay, that's very cool.
I mean, this is one of those topics there's I know what I should do, and there's what I actually do.
Yeah.
And so I guess to me, the interesting question is, why is it what you actually do?
Primarily just because it's easier than to try to, I know they have a lot of tools now where you can, move the data, and I know there's, the separation model that you can employ, but it's like, I'm not waiting until after 5 o'clock to change this field. I'm getting in there and changing it now,
Yeah, there's all these questions of convenience, and to me it's feature velocity. And if you're doing this professionally, it's features per hour, right? How much bang for the buck, whatever hackneyed phrase you want to use, but you can get more features per hour in if you work directly on live systems. And you obviously have to take precautions, not do something stupid and lock up a table. That's under active modification.
Yeah.
But you're going to get faster results. And sometimes, my experience is that people are often not crystal clear on what the spec is, what they want. And so you could build something that is exactly what they said they want, and then you've implemented, and they say, well, that's not quite what I was after. And so that iterative process that is super common in FileMaker development is most efficiently done if you're working on a live thing and they can see real live data in it, as opposed to, week-old backup or something like that. And so, yeah, it's just more efficient to do it live.
Yeah.
Is it safer? No. But can you mitigate the risk? Yes. So there you go.
Yeah. My big thing is just don't change a calculation. You can do everything else, but don't change a stored calculation in a field with a couple 100,000 records in it. You don't want to do that.
As Todd's counterpart, I'll say that we have an entire dev server set up for most of our development. I do everything in there before I put it into a live. And what I find is that I'll do it in dev, find out exactly what I need to do, and then do it in live. So I minimize my time in the live file.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you have a big gnarly calculation, you can just whip in there, make a new calc field, paste in this,
Yep.
200
Less time to manage database,
long
better in a live
calculation,
file.
get out, and you might even be able to sneak it in during a server idle time.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I do.
But I mean, scripts and layouts, I'll edit those all day on a live system. It doesn't bother me. So I just wait for the phone to ring for somebody to say, my layout keeps changing and going back to the first tab. It's like, it's fine.
It was
Stop,
Eric.
stop drinking at lunch.
I'll answer to that, because being an in-house developer, sometimes they want things changed right then and there.
Absolutely.
They got everybody on the system, and that's what happened. I've experienced that several times where they're like, wait a minute, that's not where it was on the layout. You just moved it, so my screen just changed. But so some things I have to be careful on, because when I save it, then our particular solution will blank out the whole screen, and then I get calls. So it depends on what it is.
Yeah, I mean, the answer to most of these are, it depends.
Yes.
Right.
On the subject of changing layouts, one of the things that I've seen over the years is I had a customer who was like, oh, we're going to revamp this layout. So they duplicated the layout and they made a ton of changes, look radically different, right? And then the theory was that they were going to like swap the layout in once they got it looking perfect. And I didn't see that work particularly well. And so I went with I like the idea, like this layout looks horrible, we got to make it look nice. So I went with like this evolutionary approach where I would change one thing per day or, I would change a bunch of things, and I'd only change one thing. Like I might change the color of a button, but I wouldn't move it. And then I would move it. So every change I was making was very, very, very gradual, non-traumatic. And I would just evolve the layouts. And I managed to, over a month or so, change, the looks of 20, 30, 40, 50 layouts. We're doing this with a big system, and just kind of evolution. The users seem to be able to tolerate the change as long as it's not too much all at once, and you're not changing too many modalities, location, size, and so forth. That's what we do, because we evolve a lot of live systems, reskin them in place. Live.
Yeah, I just echo what most of you have already said. It really does depend. If it's a new thing that we're building from scratch, sure, that's all built offline, and then we pick a point where we develop or we deploy. But once things go live, as a consulting firm with dozens and dozens and dozens of clients, we'd never get anything done if everything had to happen in a development server and then be moved, strategically, or doing data migrations all the time. So it really depends on the scope of what you're doing. And our bigger clients tend to have a dev server for the bigger workflows that we want to test. And of course, we have our own dev server too, but it's really just, are we doing quick tweaks or are we building new features?
So where do we draw the line between being efficient and being lazy?
Good question.
Because it's a cognitive load to say, okay, I got to build this feature, so I'm going to do it in dev, and then I need to remember to do these 6 other steps to push it live the correct way, air quotes. That's more cognitive load, and you probably are juggling a bunch of balls at work. And so for your own, conserving your mental horsepower, it's simpler to work live.
Yeah.
And we probably never think of that, really. It's just like, it'd just be easier to do this thing. Knock it in there. No.
That also comes with experience, though.
Yeah.
Pretty much everybody on this call has been doing this for many, many years. And we've all had the times, I will guess every person on this call has had the moment in their career where they hit the button to save their changes and went, oh no, because that all of a sudden you just crippled the system or crashed it or whatever. We've all done it. And we've spent, the 12 hours recovering things and importing and exporting and fixing our messes. In our business, in our group, we have some less experienced developers, and I'm always telling them, if you want to write this script, copy this script first, write it, test it, and all of that. first, be sure it does what you need it to do, then copy what you need to into production, definitely making copies and backing up.
Yeah.
But the experience level you have with using FileMaker, as well as knowing the client system that you're in, has a big impact. And as long as I know a system, I'm always going to go straight into production.
And be redundant with your backups. I like that.
Yeah.
I've been
Yeah.
many times. I know.
Yeah, I add to that. We have what we call a backup now, and before I do anything that it's going to take 2 or 3 hours, I run that backup now, just so that I ensure that I have a backup before I start messing things up, and I can go back to it and be reasonable on what's correct and not.
There's also feature branches, and Chris, I'm guessing you're going to potentially cover feature branches as a way to mitigate risk to changes where, with a simple if account name equals, Chris, then run this way and everybody else runs the other way. And if it works for you, maybe expand the number of people. So you're kind of rolling it out gradually with a toggle.
Yeah, I call those live splices, and I typically do something like check active modifier keys to see if the shift key is down. And that way it's not relying on my, user account, whoever asked for the feature. I can say, hey, Fred Flintstone, go over here, hold down the shift key and try it and tell me if that's what you want. And that way he can work with, live data, the exact scenario that he's trying to get working. And it doesn't disrupt anybody else. It's very surgical, and yet he can fork to my new code.
And I would say that this would apply to non-FileMaker Go solutions, obviously.
Yes.
Actually, I've been a little bit off topic. I have a lot of code with the get modifier thing, and then Go came, darn it, they shipped this thing for Go, and all my get modifier things. Although we do mostly desktop, like I'm guessing most people. But yeah, no, I think feature or live splices, whatever you call them, are a good thing, however you implement them. One thing that we do that gives me a little peace of mind is we have a help system that fires off tickets automatically, and we get a Slack notification if something goes wrong. Like if we do an if, else, and if it falls through all the branches that we're expecting, we'll get an immediate notification. And fix it fast. Once or twice a year, hopefully not more than that, we'll have something that didn't go perfectly. But we fix it fast. I was looking, Jerry Salem, didn't you do, I'm looking at your FM Academy, didn't you do something on help systems video?
Yeah.
I don't see it here.
You don't see it here. Oh, I did a long time ago. I think a lot of that is gone. I don't know where it went.
Server performance, creating dashboards. I know you did one on help systems.
I did. Back in the olden days, I built a help system that used a custom menu. That was when custom menus were hot. So there was like a hotkey command. It was Control 4. That was it at the place where I did that. And it would call up a dialog box. And as soon as it did that, it sent, fired off a bunch of emails. It was a nice system. Oh, thanks for remembering, Fun.
No, yeah, there was a good video. I just can't find it here. They should bring it back. I want my money back, even though it was free.
Yeah. I remember all those words. I'll tell them to you sometime.
All right. See, were we still on live versus test systems, or had you guys switched topics while I was taking care of my hounds?
We were doing live.
Okay.
A lot of enthusiasm for working live here on the East Coast.
Okay. All righty. Working without a net. I love it. Okay. How about anything more before we move on? So I don't want to cut anybody off, but
For the record, since we're being recorded, the FM migration tool built by Claris International is an awesome tool and completely appropriate for a variety of different use cases.
all
I
right.
must say that I'm mildly impressed at the number of people who are willing to admit that they work on live systems, even though they've been developing for a long time. And we do that too. You know, we have some clients we never work live, and other ones we do when we have to. So whenever we work live, we just it's much more convenient if you program without bugs. That it goes a lot better.
Well, like what Beth said, it's experience to know when you're playing with fire, and you know,
For sure.
some things you know you can do, and other things probably not a brilliant idea. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, stay away. Field schema, and somebody already mentioned it, is a dangerous one. And I've heard rumors, it's never bit me, but I've heard rumors that if you've got like a server crash, or not a server, because the server would never crash. If you have a network drop during live development while you're in security, it could be cause some level of corruption. So someone already said do lots of backups. That sounds like a good idea too.
That's a good idea no matter what you're doing. So
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. Development or not, just lots of backups.
all right. Shall we move on? Buttons or button bars? I'm interested to hear what you all have to say about that topic.
Button bars. Because even if you're using a button bar of 1, you have way more control over what you can do. Naming it, styling it, all of those things. You can't do certain things with just a button anymore.
We use button bars way more often than buttons.
Regular buttons are still more convenient.
Yeah. Any of you that were at the presentation I did on where I revealed the chart of XML versus JSON, those were all button bars and with a hide pause condition. And I could calculate the text that was in them really easily. Could not have done it otherwise.
I'll say something nice about buttons. And someone maybe also look 15% lighter. If you copy the XML from a button and a button bar and you compare the number of characters, the button has 15% less. So in theory, it's 15% lighter, less filling. And I refuse to use button bars prior to FileMaker 14 because they didn't exist prior to 14. But everyone these days, I think everyone's on, FileMaker 23 and stuff like that. Or 19, I mean.
Did you ever see a performance difference?
No, it was just a theoretical difference. I kind of felt bad for the buttons because everybody's, like, they've been with us so long, they've been good to us. And then button bars, everybody's like running over. Where's the loyalty? I will say, sort of an interesting topic, which is tangential, is since buttons only showed up in 12 before that, we had grouped objects. Buttons only in 12. That's true. I have a lot of systems that have grouped objects, and I do like to refactor them. I don't like the time it takes to refactor them. I like to refactor group objects into buttons because they're easier to work with on the user interface level. But I too like button bars, layout level calculations. What's not to like?
The only thing I don't like is when it's a single button, you have to click to select the button bar, and then if you want to change anything about the segment itself, then it's an extra click to get into the the different stylings for hover and pressed and all that kind of stuff. And if I just want a simple button and I get to a layout where it's a single button that's actually a button bar masquerading as a button, it's just like, oh man, now I gotta click twice. And it's just, but that's a personal issue. That's not,
Those are clicks, those add up. That's your life.
But then, Todd, when you need to put an alternative button in that same space, and you can just add the second button to the button bar that's already within that space and add all of your conditions, and
Yeah.
then you'll be happy it's there.
Yeah. See, that's the mantra that I quote to myself to calm down after I've gotten mad at the button bar because it takes extra clicks to modify it. So
You're preparing for the future.
all right. Anything else on buttons versus button bars? All right, hearing nothing. Let's jump back. Chris had another one that he threw up there. JSON versus let notation for passing parameters. I mean, I will speak to that in that I couldn't figure out let notation, so I never used it. I just did everything return separated. And now if I'm passing one parameter, it's in JSON.
So back in the day when the FileMaker naming conventions website came up, and we're probably talking maybe 10 years ago at this point, the pound notation, the custom function where you do pound and pound assign and stuff like that, those were widely made available, and they do all the sort of baking for you in terms of formatting stuff in let notation. So you can just do pound, it'll give you the parentheses and you put in your name value pair and just concatenate as many of those as you need to string together. It doesn't care, order doesn't matter. And all of those are referenced by name. So then on the other end, you just get, a constellation of variables pop out. And so to me, that's dead simple. It's easy to understand for new developers. So it's an efficient way to get a new developer up to speed. Whereas if somebody isn't familiar with, there's a lot more of a lift to get someone who's not familiar with JSON to be able to, conceptualize JSON, figure out how to parse it apart, figure out how to handle problems if there are some, because there are some. I just think it's a simpler way, and especially if you have to turn over a system to an in-house developer who may not, be familiar with JSON. So for ease of future maintainability, I think it's easier to wrap your head around just using the pound custom function and pound assign than it is to say, let me tell you about JSON. Like, oh God. So for all of those reasons, I think that's a simpler way to go for future maintainability. Not that I have anything against JSON, but I think JSON adds needless complexity when there are simpler solutions.
Eric would probably would agree with you on that one, I think, because I do everything in JSON. Now, the one thing I will say I did, and this goes back, I guess, to where we started, is that I actually came up with a custom function that will take the JSON that I pass it as a parameter and then declare all the variables for me, so I don't have to, parse them out per se, because the custom function does it for me. But you still have to get it formatted as JSON to pass it to the subscript as the parameter. So
I just think that pound notation is just so dead simple to use that you can turn it over to anybody and they'll get it.
But they have to have a custom function, and they have to know to get it and put it into their app. If they don't have it, it's not going to work without it. So I have often taken my time to learn, the newer, more real programming things that FileMaker comes out with every new version. And it took me a long time to try JSON, but now that I've experimented, it's not that hard, and it's the future, and it is how every other app out there communicates. So it's worth the time, I think, at this point to learn it. I mean, unless you're talking about a system that's been around forever and, the staff there is not going to change for 40 years. And anyway.
It's also really useful if you have to have any interaction with API endpoints and you're going to be getting back JSON payloads anyway. And at that point,
right.
As well.
And it's, the JSON functions are native in FileMaker now. So, and I'm guessing that will only increase with what's available. So, I mean, it's another one of those it depends situations where, there are valid arguments for both.
Yeah, I agree that just learning the JSON and figuring out what those patterns are, because you're going to get it from other places. You do have the functions, but when it gets to the web viewer and using JavaScript, you might as well learn what the JSON patterns are from the get-go, rather than relying on a custom function.
I'm going to step in and stand up for the Six Fried Rice. So we use JSON, and certainly with an API that expects JSON, we use JSON because that's what it expects. So JSON function showed up in 16. We've been around for a while, so we didn't use JSON prior to 16 because it didn't exist, unless you're doing what's that thing, base elements. So we did initially, many years ago, I went with this XML type passing format. And at some point I looked at it, it's like, wait a second, this is a little bit verbose. And it's also not, it could break in like some edge cases. And I looked at the Six Fried Rice, which I think is one of the flavors of the hash functions. And I looked at it for like, a long time. I was like, I don't see how this breaks ever, because the way they escape or encode rather and decode. So we went with that back in FileMaker 12, 13, 14, 15, and so forth. And then now we're up in 16 and above, and we'll still use it in a system that's using it because it's already there. And I think one of the interesting topics for this is which one's faster. Because there's nothing to stop someone from using JSON to talk to an API. Everyone should know JSON, that's for sure. But if you're building, dictionaries, Six Fried Rice dictionaries to pass around, or you're building JSON objects to pass around, which one's faster? On runtime. So I think it's a lively topic that should be, continually discussed. And we're obviously only going to use it when when the deployment is absolutely positively locked down at 16 and above, which obviously gets easier and easier as we go from 19 to 20 and so forth. If servers on 18, you're guaranteed to have JSON success. Below that, if you have a server 16, someone could sneak in with a FileMaker 14 or 15, and then you might have an issue. I like them both.
All right. Anything more on JSON versus let notation?
The JSON format elements is nice. Just to say, the ability to validate the well-formattedness of the package is a good feature and make it look pretty. See, I like them both.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll jump in. Tony just threw one out there, but SVG, glyphs versus icons and container fields. So we'll let you go ahead and get started there, Tony.
Yeah,
you're the one that threw
let me kick it off. This is something I've been thinking about. So we have, I have a multi-file system that's, got a lot of files, 20 years old. We do a lot of projects over the years. So we have a purchase order file, we have an inventory file, we have all these. So glyphs showed up in 14, but we're plugging away since FileMaker 2. So one of the techniques that's been around forever is to have container fields in a resource table that get set into global fields in a central file, and those icons are visible everywhere because they're global fields and they look nice. And if you get a better icon, you change it in the resource table and it changes everywhere. So that's terrific news. So that's what we have all over the place. But then glyphs show up, and what I would say, they give you nice portability. So let's say I've got somebody calls up, say, oh, I want to do this project. And I've got a file that's just right for them because I want a purchase order system. Well, I happen to have a purchase order system, or they want, whatever. But if my user interface is tied to a central file with icons, then I can't just give them the one file. I got to give them this plus the main, and that's less portable code. On the other hand, if I replace the icons with SVGs, I think it's less dry because I might have an icon to like a copy button or a new button or a print button. And as a glyph, it probably shows up in the XML multiple times. So I think it's interesting, like pros and cons. I've been doing more and more glyphs, obviously, just to have code that's portable. So I can send one file out the door without having it be dependent on a main menu file. So I wonder what other people are thinking about this.
I guess I'll jump in. I guess the big thing for me is with the SVG glyphs is that you can do conditional formatting. You know, when they're in your button, you know, you can, you have a little bit more control over that kind of thing. But, you know, if everybody decides we don't like the looks of that icon, now all of a sudden you're changing that SVG, you know, however many places you used it and not just in your, you know, master, you know, file that has your container field in it. So.
Good points. Must be a controversial topic.
Yeah.
Okay, who here is not, who here has never used an icon in a global field? Who here has never used a glyph? Who here has never had the same quandary?
I mean, I will say, I mean, I think we still use like the global container, but it's more for like a company logo if we're wanting to have like a color version that's on the data entry layouts and a black and white version that's on the printed layouts for reports and things like that. But I would say most everywhere else we've, you know, switched over to use the, whatever the standard icons are. We use like flat icon to find, you know, other SVGs that, you know, fit in for whatever we're looking for. So.
Yeah, we try and use as many of the built-ins as we can because they're built in. Although I will say, if FileMaker's listening, love the product, love the icons. Can we get more built in? There's a bunch of features that are not represented here.
Yeah, I agree with Todd. For when you need something to appear on every layout or nearly every layout with that alternate black and white and color, then yeah, the bee's knees is to have that global container field. But I do like the icons, and the way to get them from file to file is just create a button bar with whatever icons you're using, and then when you paste it into the new file, they do show up in that dialog to select.
Yeah, that's a good technique. And I've sort of landed on the fact that like I really don't change the interface much. It's like, oh, but if I change the look of this button, I'm like, yeah, well, I do that like once every 5 years, so I can probably just do that over the weekend while watching TV at the same time.
Anything else on that before we move on? So I've got a couple more on my list, unless somebody else has another duo that they want to throw into the ring. How about filtered relationships versus execute SQL?
Use them both. And when I get into trouble with the SQL, I send BJ both an email saying, "What did I do wrong?"
Yeah. I don't like to use execute SQL as a calculation ever. I always wanted to do it through a scripted set process, just because it's safer that way. But it depends on what I need to filter, because sometimes I want a portal that will be a toggle, and I want to say, you know, who's active and who's not active. And I might do that where it's a global setting, and then the filter bases off of that global field. And so that's a toggle. It doesn't need to be any other way. Now that we have the same table portal, some of that goes away because you can just have the portal change based on your find. But again, it depends, like all the answers, it really depends on what you want to do. But I try not to use the execute SQL any more than I absolutely have to, and it's all scripted.
I was going to say exactly what Beverly said.
I guess I don't understand how those are equivalent things. I think of a filtered portal as very different from an execute SQL. And unless I'm trying to do something like get a count or a total of line items in a filtered portal, I would just use a summary field from the related table, and that would work on the filtered portal. But I would never, unless you're using a virtual list somehow, I don't see how an execute SQL is equivalent to a filtered portal or could be substituted for one.
Okay. Well, I guess, where this came from my perspective, and it was a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, they all run together, so I'm not really sure. But I was trying to do something, and I thought, well, I don't want to add another TO on my graph and come up with the relationship. I'll just use execute SQL to get this count, Well, it seemed like it was taking a long time. So I actually put in like a get, the UTC millisecond at the start of my script, ran the execute SQL statement, and then, did the math to figure out how many milliseconds it took, which was 755 seconds is how long it took to do this calculation, which it could be a problem with the way the execute SQL statement was written, because I'm not a SQL guy. That's why I use FileMaker, but that's another story. But then when I went ahead and added the relationship and changed the calculation that was in my script to use that relationship, it ran in 381 milliseconds. So like I said, I can't remember the exact scenario of what I was trying to accomplish, Chris, but that's where that question came from. And I've just run into issues where you think execute SQL is awesome, and then you're like, wait a minute, the performance is horrible. So let's let FileMaker be FileMaker.
Yeah, I used to use execute SQL in that sort of respect, like a Band-Aid, until I could get in and do it the FileMaker way, which I know will last longer and be faster. And
what's the FileMaker way?
Depends on what it is. Maybe in a form on a perform script on server, go to the right table occurrence, do the find that you were trying to get the summary of, and then sum it up, and then get the answer that way. It depends. But for a lot of things that I was doing execute SQL for, it was typically a lot. It was easy to get the answer, but in the long run, it was a lot slower and finicky on large systems. If someone's locking a table or something, you're hosed. Or you'd lock a table and hose everyone else. Same thing.
Yeah, I'm not. I agree, Jerry, and other people have said execute SQL. I know it came out. A lot of people using it. A couple of reasons I don't like it very much. One, it uses indirection unless you wrap things with a get field, and I'm not sure what that does to the performance. And then there's the issue that Jerry just mentioned, which is apparently it's very, very significant, an uncommitted record somewhere. So the selling point, as far as I could tell, one of the selling points of execute SQL is that you don't need the graph as much. You don't need table occurrences on the graph. But I'm doing what Jerry's doing. There's a guy named Kent, I'll give him a hat tip, because he mentioned the idea of having in your system a faceless logic file, a file that doesn't have a user interface, but it uses separation to point to whatever table. And you can call that and run a find and get a result back. You tell it, run this script with this, send it some find criteria, have it do the find, have it bring the data back and unpack it. I don't think that's much different than what an execute SQL call will do, except that it doesn't use indirection. And I believe that it doesn't have the issue of speed catastrophe, going slow, if there's an uncommitted record. So I've been using faceless logic file. Kent from New Zealand, if you're listening, thanks very much, great idea. But time and a place, execute SQL, it's good for querying the built-in tables.
Muted myself to let the train go past, but I will say I probably use execute SQL a little bit less now, because one of the things I use it for all the time was select distinct.
Yeah.
But now that we have the ability, there's the unique values function
Right.
it kind of eliminates the need of having to even do that. So all right. Anything else on that?
One thing you can do with execute SQL that I don't know that you can easily do any other way. I don't think that, does the API allow you to drop indexes?
Allow you to do what?
Drop indexes on fields?
The API.
Yeah, I don't recall.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either, but execute SQL will allow you to drop index. And so if you have, importing from mainframe files or something like that is almost quaint now, but there are still places that have them. So if you have, an overnight process that imports a gigantic table of data and you're trying to pull it into something that has index fields, especially, it could be a wide table and you might have 20 index fields because you have subsequent searches. You can vastly speed that process up by dropping all your indexes first. So FileMaker does an unindexed import much faster than an indexed import, and then restore the indexes post-import. That is faster than importing index without doing those pre and post operations.
Are you talking about the execute SQL script statement?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we were all basically talking about the function, but that's a good point.
Yeah, that's one thing I don't like about execute SQL is that it's ambiguously named. Is it almost for the function and the script the same? I will say something nice about execute SQL. Somebody, I think it was, I forget who, someone out of Australia, I think, came up with a nice way to query the built-in tables. I just dropped the code that we use, which is really nice for getting a list of the base tables and table names and so forth and so on. It's a good way to get a sense of how horrible a relationship graph is, or how awesome it is. So I just dropped that in the chat.
Well, the execute SQL for metadata now allows Windows users to extract the same information that Macintosh users have been able to extract using Apple events for a long time. And of course, when the time comes that Apple events go away, that will then become the standard, the SQL will become the standard method of extracting that. And if you've got a situation where you've got a local development file and then a copy of that file in production on a server, and the field IDs get out of sync, it can that can very quickly help you identify where the problem is so you can fix it.
Stephen, are you saying I might have missed something that happened in the FileMaker community. Are you saying the execute SQL command targeting the native tables has been expanded since it first have they revved that, made it more powerful?
Yes, I believe they have. Wim DeCourt, and I think in one of his DevCon presentations several years ago talked about that, but it's it's select table ID, select table name, field type, or field ID, a whole lot of things like that.
Oh yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, there's a nice collection of execute SQL things that supplement the design functions. That give you some things that the design functions don't do. Complementary.
Correct. Perhaps the Slant, the blog postings on the Slant website may contain some of that information.
And I'll say one other thing. Applescript, incredibly useful. A lot of clients using it. Anyone from Claris listening, never, ever, ever take it away. It's a competitive advantage. You'd be amazed how much Applescript is out there.
Apple itself no longer officially is doing any work about Applescript, and they have not since Sal Segoyan left.
Yeah, I've heard that. I'm a huge fan, and maybe I'll take his place as a booster. They did build a bridge to Objective-C, and you know, who knows? Maybe they'll realize how much use it is out there.
Oh, there's absolutely no question that it's, you know, in great use both for inter-application communication and for internal FileMaker analysis. In fact, if you will look closely, and I'm going to give the wrong version if I'm not careful, 15, 16, whatnot. If you will look in the privileges area, you will see that we were finally able to get the privilege sets in there for the privilege bits rather to control access by both ActiveX and Apple events, because they were a huge attack vector if they were misused.
Yeah, if they were misused. The Applescript, my testing, and you're right, 15 and 16, Applescript always respected the security privilege to my testing. But people were doing, Stephen, what I think you would call out as security by obscurity. So it was nice of FileMaker to kind of, you know, patch what people were doing in the real world.
Well, no, that's not the issue. You could circumvent using Apple event commands, a do script, FileMaker script, relog, and people would put these full access relog credential scripts, and all you had to do was, you know, run that externally. Or if someone had a scripted process where you were supposed to stop and do things and then proceed to the next step, you could kill that with a simple halt script, which you could put in another file. I mean, there's some.
Yeah, those are two very, you know, spot on attack vectors. I saw Soliant had something where they were using guard variables to protect people calling scripts directly.
Oh yeah, I mean there were workarounds, or there were partial preventions, but a lot of people A, didn't know that there was a problem, and B, didn't know that there was a partial amelioration. I don't want to, you know, spend a lot of time talking about this, and I don't want to be unduly self-promotional, but if you will look on fmforums.com for my security blog, there's an article entitled, I think it's called "The APIs Are Your Friends?" ? That article is a number of years old, but it talks about that. But now you can stop that type of behavior, just like perform FMP URL.
Yep.
I mean, there was a workaround for that, but people didn't know it. So
yeah, and your Stephen, your point about the ability to run a halt, and if you run a halt and you've got any kind of state that's persistent, you know, post halt, that's a big security hole. So any script that halts should, I'd imagine if you run a script that halts, be interesting to know what happens to the single and double $ variables.
Good question. I don't know that, or don't remember it right off the top of my head. But you also had problems with transfile, you know, with transversing between layouts. Just because a layout wasn't in the layout menu didn't mean you couldn't get to it without having to use the developer's logic. So
yeah, that was massive hole. Yeah,
sort of wandering off topic here for this group, but
well, I would say I read all your stuff, and I try to appreciate it. Thank you.
You do better than I do.
No, I look at it all, and I think it's fascinating and absolutely important. You know, we use a ton of Applescript for a ton of different things here. I wouldn't say I'm dependent on it, because you know, not really dependent on anything. But you know, we use Applescript.
You can stop using it anytime you want.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go to the beach. I'll set up a permaculture farm.
There are people on this call who have worked in firms that where Applescript and Apple Events, to be most precise, was extremely important for communicating between information in a database and, let's say, what was that Adobe product, InDesign, or a number of other such things. That's not the type of work that I have done in my too many years in the FileMaker community. But the key point here, to get back to where we started, is that the use of execute SQL to extract metadata from files for analytical purposes, I think, is a pretty important use of it. And it appears to me that Apple is moving further and further away from having this technology, and more importantly, perhaps having people who have knowledge of it on their engineering teams.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. In the meantime, I'm using it to archive emails because the Apple Mail, from emails, I just archive them into FileMaker, and it works beautifully.
Do the same thing off of a number of lists. You just select the email, punch the button, and boom.
Yeah,
and
you can save the individual EML. Apple Mail, Applescript implementation is awesome. But anyway, it's good stuff.
If you figure out how to get the attachments, send me.
Yeah, we do that. We get the whole 9 yards. We in Apple Mail, I was super impressed. I moved from Outlook, which was a little, looked like it hadn't gotten a lot of TLC from Microsoft. I moved to Apple Mail, and I was very pleasantly surprised with the Applescript implementation, the ability to extract the EML file by itself, put it on 2 different servers, extract the text, the recipients, and the attachments, everything. Boom. Beautiful implementation from Apple on Apple Mail. But anyway, I appreciate the security stuff and the platform in general. And I think we covered this topic, whatever the heck the topic was. I think we covered it pretty good.
I think so. Anybody else have any other topics they want to throw out there? Or I know we're getting close to, about 10 after 8, which is when we start moving into our one more thing and all of that. So we can just transition into that unless anybody has a topic that just needs to be discussed as far as this or that would you rather. So, all right, well, if no objections, we'll just go ahead and move into one more thing. So does anybody have one more thing they either want to ask or share, or both, I guess? Okay, well, I have a question then, hopefully with, I don't know, try not to stump you also, because hopefully you'll have an answer for me. We ran into an issue with our sister company on Friday that we have a lot of iOS devices using Jamf to manage said devices. A checkbox got checked, a checkbox got unchecked. We're not exactly sure what happened, but it just decided to do something. And when we came in Monday or Tuesday morning, rather, all of the persistent IDs on most of the iOS devices had changed. So the persistent ID was not persistent. And so we had to go around and reset them because we were using the persistent ID to know that, okay, this iPad is in this area and it does this job. Has anybody ever heard of any workarounds to make sure that the actual persistent ID stays persistent, or is that just one of those things you just got to deal with?
I try and stay away from persistent ID. It's been squishy for years. Once upon a time you could get, MAC address and stuff like that, and then that became anonymized. So the feature has not had sort of consistent functionality version to version. So I just kind of gave up on it.
Okay.
Chris, what do you use instead? Or, should you have the need to have some sort of persistent identification of an iPad?
Yeah, I was mostly using it for audit logging. So it's like, what machine, made this record change? So it was that kind of more of a in the moment tracking than trying to assign functionality to a device.
Okay.
So can you, I'd heard the same thing that Chris mentioned, that the persistent ID was a little bit unreliable. That said, I don't know, can you, if you name the iPads, can the users, with a MDM deployment, can you lock down the name of the iPad?
I guess we could look at doing that. I don't know that that's something that we had tried. I know because originally we had been using the MAC address, and then that became, I don't know if it was for security reasons or whatever. I think it was more of the iOS rather than FileMaker Go. said, we're not going to let you see that anymore. So that's when we switched to the persistent ID. And at one point, we discovered that as long as you installed the new version of FileMaker Go before you removed the old version, it would typically keep the same persistent ID. It was when you completely removed the old version before you put the new version on. And in this case, multiple versions of FileMaker Go were still installed, but yet the persistent ID somehow decided it was time to change. So we're looking for
So
a
I
better
mean,
method.
does get username work on a mobile device? I would think perhaps it does. And then I guess get account name, although get account name would require that people are logging in. No, that wouldn't work because that wouldn't tell you the location. I don't know. Get username, maybe. I give up.
Well, yeah, we'll try it and see. So just
I think
curious
get
what everybody else was
username
doing.
will return iPad in some instances. Did you make, Todd, any change in the operating system, the iOS version?
You know, that's the one thing I did not go back and double check. I don't know if it pushed updates and, you know, updated iOS versions over the weekend and we didn't notice it.
There was an issue at one time, and I don't have clients who use iPads, so I don't track this very carefully. But a change in the iOS operating system would cause the persistent ID to change, and that was part of the reason why, as Chris Morier points out, that it's not a terribly reliable functionality. The best thing to do would be maybe to post a question to the community forum, and let's see who may have a better recollection than I do about that. But there was an issue with persistent ID. Okay. And some of this goes all the way back to 2013, when Dominique Goupil in the closing session of the DevCon announced, the reliance for the future on mobile, at the same time that Apple was pulling back for their stated security reasons on some of these features that you alluded to.
Okay. Well, thank you all for the info. Does anybody else have one more thing?
I did just want to add, Todd, that we do have a couple of clients with UserPad implementations, and we haven't used persistent ID, but username does work. In FileMaker Go, there's a settings area where you can specify username. So you can name things.
Okay.
If they all, are unique, then maybe that helps.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, it's usually typically, because I mean, the iPads are mounted, so it's not like they're wandering around. Mm-hmm. And we know it's either, at the front of the line, the back of the line, in this area of the plant.
Right.
So there's not really any overlap. So that's something we can certainly consider.
Name them front, back, whatever.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Okay. Anybody else have one more thing?
I got a little bit of a gotcha, just heads up. I'm right in the middle, so I don't have an answer, but it's just a heads up. We had a barcode. We have an implementation that generates barcodes using a JavaScript library. Worked fine. Broken Big Sur, works in Catalan and Broken Big Sur. What are we using? JS barcode. Right in the middle of it. So just a heads up, if you got one of those out there, you might want to test to see what the heck happens if somebody rolls out Big Sur. That all said, shout out to the Kentucky group that had Hunza from Czech Republic. I haven't had a chance to look at it, but he did barcode generation by hacking the PDF, not hacking, but by implementing a PDF creation because PDFs are text. I haven't looked at it, but that looked kind of intriguing and might be our way forward on Big Sur. So just heads up there.
Anyone else?
All I wanted to say is that I learned that it depends is the what I end up learning today was it depends. It was everybody said it depends, and I'm in that class too. But yeah, no.
There's only one correct answer.
Yes,
It depends.
That one is always the correct answer. It's never wrong.
Yes.
Very true. Okay, well, let's see. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Oh, Thomas, are you able to let me share my screen?
How's that?
It depends.
All right, so just to get into our quick wrap up here. One of the survey questions that we asked last time was after seeing Beverly's presentation on XML and FileMaker U, and right now the majority said that they now know what they don't know, and they've got some homework to do, but they thought it looked promising. So there we go with that. Second question we asked was what tasks do you typically perform at least 75% of the time when using the on first window open script trigger? So the majority was for layout navigation and installing registering plugins. So you can kind of see what was happening there. And then the last question was just which of these highly anticipated Hollywood blockbusters do you plan to see in 2021? And that was either in the theater once we're able to go back to the theaters, or even if you just watch it, streaming same day in the comfort of your own home. So I can say that apparently the majority of FileMaker developers like Marvel movies, Ghostbusters, and The Matrix. So you can check out the results there. Important dates. Our next meeting is in August because we take a break here in July. So we will not meet again until August 4th. Not exactly sure what's going to be happening then, but we'll be hopefully back together in person is the goal. We'll still do an online virtual option for those that aren't able to join us or don't feel comfortable joining us, but hopefully we will actually be back in person come August. The Claris Engage Beyond 2021 virtual event is, I think, coming up. I haven't seen a lot of details, just that it looks like they're going to start releasing sessions during both the third and fourth quarters of this year. And I do know that they are hoping to schedule something, or at least a few of those sessions around the time where maybe we could have some kind of watch party and all get together and share some food and watch a couple presentations. So that will be, those details are still coming, and so we'll keep you all posted. And then the last important date is that Tomorrow War, starring Chris Pratt, debuts on Amazon Prime July 2nd. So you want to circle your calendars for that one. Again, the next topic, we'll tell you when you're older. That's not the actual topic. We're literally going to tell you when you're older. So once we figure out what we're doing, we'll let you all know. And there will be a survey that we'll send out. And then just thank you to everyone. And also thanks once again to Thomas and Teresa at Profile Developers for letting us use their Zoom meeting space for our meetings. So, well, and I guess I do have one more thing. Paul wasn't able to join us tonight, so I feel compelled to share one more thing. But I went to a karaoke bar the other night and I got kicked out after singing Danger Zone 5 times in a row. Apparently I exceeded the maximum number of logins attempts.
Ouch.
That's great. Bye, guys.
So.
Well, you did Paul proud.
It's like I try. So, Okay. Does anybody else, I guess, before as we're signing off, but did anybody come up with one more thing, question they wanted to ask, or anything they wanted to share? All right. Well,
A lot of things about.
Oops, sorry about that. The you mentioned karaoke bar. If people haven't seen it, you should Google Jewel, the singer Jewel, goes to a karaoke bar undercover. It's A, she's a great singer. B, it's a great little bit.
Very entertaining bit, yeah.
If you haven't seen it,
Okay.
it's awesome.
All right. Very good. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone. Have a great evening and a great next couple months. And hopefully we'll see you all back in August.
Thanks for the show.